Thank you so much. So for today's session, we aim to take a maximum of 1.5 hours. So we are planning to end this session at exact 6:30 p.m. East Africa time. So as we're about to start the session, each one of you are aware of what is happening at the global level, mainly at Afghanistan. We have been receiving a lot of questions. We have been receiving a lot of requests concerning the impact of the resurgence of Taliban in the sector of the counterterrorism efforts. As about to start this session, we will give each speaker 15 minutes, a maximum of 15 minutes to do a presentation or to speak on what is going on. And also we will have some specific questions asked to the speakers. Some of you might need to submit your concern, opinion, and some of the few questions regarding this session. So this is a participatory session and we are all welcome here. So Mr. Abdul will give you a maximum of 15 minutes to briefly talk concerning your experience, what is happening in Afghanistan, and brief or the whole about these historical events and how they've been affecting the counterterrorism efforts. Mr. Abdul, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me in the program. Unfortunately, as you can see in the media and you can hear, a lot of bad things happening in Afghanistan. Certainly, at the global level, it's we are everywhere on the top of the headlines due to the foreign intervention. We can say due to a lot of bad experiences in Afghanistan. I would say there is unfortunately no such a success story that you want to learn from Afghanistan when it comes to counterterrorism. Definitely there are a lot of failures. The international community have failed in Afghanistan, mainly because of the dirty people in the office, dirty politicians, high level of corruption and all, of course, which is not only happening, all of them cannot happen only from inside the country. It definitely had very huge hands from outside the country. If you look at it from the beginning, who was Taliban and how they started and all, I'm sure you can see a lot of information and documentary about those available on the internet. We're going to talk today about just the facts, the realities, which a lot of media are actually not covering. For example, one of the things that today you can see is the world is trying to talk with with a group which was considered and introduced as a terrorist group, like deadly. They were on demand and they were like clear enemy of a lot of countries. They have killed a lot of Afghans. They have killed a lot of international soldiers. They have killed it actually from different countries. It's a huge disrespect to Afghans plus to the international community. Those soldiers actually who worked in Afghanistan lost their lives. It's a huge disrespect to them to coming and sitting talking with Taliban. But it's clear, like they have indicated that talking to Taliban, it doesn't mean that they will recognize them. I hope they don't recognize them. And even talking, I hope the talking to Taliban, like which is going on in Qatar right now, that will not gonna give them a fake legitimacy or a fake power or strength or a belief that they have done something really great, and that will definitely persuade other terrorist groups. This is exactly all the terrorist groups they're watching, they're looking what's happening, and it's a good experience actually for them to see what's going to happen. Like if this is a great success story for them to take a look and they'll just say, you know what, so they're doing a great job. Like they're now sitting, like flying in business class, going to, for example, to Doha and sitting with some international representative, and they're talking about the legitimacy. They're talking about as if they came in an appropriate way, as if they have done some great job to Afghanistan and the rest of country. And even Afghans don't know from where these guys are, where these guys are from. They call themselves Afghan. If they were Afghan, no Afghan will kill Afghan, or no African will kill African. Like if you were Afghan, like from the beginning, that you had to, like, there was no crime that they have left behind. They have killed the soldier, killed the military people, killed non-military people, make suicide bomb attacks in the hospital that infants died. I mean, this is something brutal, completely not acceptable. I mean, who does suicide bomb attack in a hospital where baby borns are there? And imagine, this is just a few examples of them talking about the crimes of these people. And now the other thing, which is very annoying, very annoying to hear in the news, like the Taliban has changed, or Taliban is, they're talking about the Taliban and the change of terrorist group. How come a terrorist group can change? Imagine if in any country somebody doing a small crime, that person will have to face the consequence. If the crime is big, they have to go to jail. They cannot just say, you know what, this guy just killed somebody and then now he is changed, so we're not going to jail him. So it's, I think it's, there is some kind of political game is going on definitely behind, because such a terrorist group cannot come a small, like, imagine they are not even 1 million in terms of numbers. How come they can come and take a country as a whole? Like we had, there was Afghan national forces, Afghan kill forces, Afghan army, so many things were there. Like it was impossible to come and invade a country in such a way. Certainly there is some political game behind, but at the same time, that we speaking of counterterrorism, I believe this is a big failure. International communities, including United States, European countries, and all, they have declared they have failed in Afghanistan. While they said they went for a purpose and it was achieved, unfortunately, it was not achieved. They know, like a lot of American politicians, a lot of experts in the area, military experts, terrorism experts, and all, they have indicated that they have failed badly. They went to Afghanistan to eradicate Taliban. Well, after 20 years, they came out kicked by Taliban, and that's something. It's a very big question mark. And I think this is gonna definitely. I hope the world is talking about it. I hope the world is stop talking about Taliban, because they cannot do anything. I hope they don't recognize them. If they recognize Taliban, it means automatically, like there are other terrorist groups bigger than Taliban, or in collaboration with Taliban. They are watching this, they're looking to this. They can do a lot of bad stuff everywhere, in all the countries. 9/11 didn't happen in Afghanistan. 9/11 happened in US. That was the massive tragedy. They can do another hundreds of 9/11s everywhere. Just take a plane and go hit it in the different buildings and do a lot of bad stuff. Now, the most dangerous thing is by recognizing, by giving them legitimacy, they will have they will have their hands on resources, on money, on weapons, on international relation, on traveling, on everything. If these people are recognized, it means they can travel, they can transfer money, they can get money, they can do everything they will be able to do. It means they can fully strengthen their communication, their relationship, their collaboration with other terrorist groups. If you look at them, how they came, they don't have the knowledge. They are not expert of any field. They are not expert of military, or they don't have technological expertise. They don't have knowledge. They don't have anything. How these people came into power? Of course, through the terrorism, through killing, through all these bad stuff. And how they're going to continue? They will continue the same. Today, if you look at Afghanistan, we close we monitor the situation very closely. Afghans are not happy. Like there are most of us, like you can see some media channels, like the news channels. They go there, they pretend as if some Afghan people are happy with Taliban. Who said they're happy? Some of them, they cannot even talk because of the fear. They might gonna go kill their parents if they say we are not happy from Taliban. So they have to, out of their fear, they have to show as if they are okay with this government. While if they were okay, you saw what happened in the airport in Afghanistan. Why so much people are trying to flee from the country? Why people now, if you look at the Iran-Afghan border, Pakistan and Afghan border, there are huge, like massive number of refugees that are trying to get out of the country, because they know, Afghan knows, and everybody knows that these people cannot run the government. There will be horrible stories in the country, and there will be a lot of other tragedies, for not just for Afghanistan. We're not just talking about Afghanistan. As I said, 9/11 was not in Afghanistan. They're going to happen in things going to go wrong in Africa, in Central Asia, and the remaining countries in Asia, in Europe and United States, probably everywhere, because terrorist groups, we can see they're everywhere. It's already, we are seeing the extremists from Iraq and Syria flowing into Afghanistan already. And that's all. That's a huge, danger alarm for the rest of the countries. And I think they should look at this a small example already from this beginning, from the very beginning, like without they being recognized, without Taliban having any kind of access internationally. They're already communicating with other terrorist groups, and they're just putting different names. They themselves doing some suicide bomb attack in Kabul. They're putting them on the name of, I don't know, Islamic State and Daesh and all. And if you want to know like how strong is Daesh and Islamic State, as strong as Taliban is there. It means Taliban equals to Daesh, Daesh equals to Islamic. All of these terrorist groups, even Boko Haram in Africa, all of these terrorist groups are interconnected with each other. Same way, like the rest of the countries, like the normal people work, need communication, need international support, need banking, need everything. Terrorist groups also need communication, their allies, their partner, their collaborator, so that they can do whatever they want. Otherwise, by themselves alone, they cannot do anything. So by recognizing Taliban, by giving them legitimacy, it means that you have given legitimacy to more suicide bomb attacks, to more terrorist activities everywhere in the world, not just to Afghanistan or in the region or to neighboring countries of Afghanistan.
Well, thank you so much, Abdul, for giving us your brief statement concerning what is going on in Afghanistan and to understand more concerning the Taliban. Something I really got from you is that terrorism is a transnational security issues. And something I picked from you is that terrorists are working together, are working in collaborative, supporting each other. And these events might or will, or they're already inspiring some of the terrorist organizations across the world. I think I've captured this clear from your side. So before we head to question, I would like to welcome Mr. David. Mr. David also have a lot of experience concerning what is going on. We've been following you so closely, Mr. David, in LinkedIn, and I've been observing that you've been updating us in the development of ongoing events since the withdrawal of US soldiers. So, Mr. David, maybe you can take this platform and share with us to understand more of the historical events, briefly the historical events of how Taliban was formed, to understand more concerning how these events have led to terrorism issues, and also to look more deeper concerning this matter and how maybe they might inspire other terrorist organizations across the globe, especially in Africa, whereby we have Al-Shabaab from Somalia, we have Boko Haram from Nigeria, and we have more of the terrorist organization like in Mali. Mr. David, take over.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and you are very correct. And I thank also my co-panelist for that, very, in-depth analysis. Abdul Rahim, thank you very much for that. I think if we want to understand what is going on now in the world, as far as the label terrorism is concerned, or insurgency is concerned, we've got to be able to tie it down to the, what we all refer to as the Cold War days. And exactly that was the conflict, of the geopolitical conflict between the United States and the then USSR. The US, did not want the USSR to succeed. They wanted the USSR to collapse. And they found a very fine opportunity at that time in Afghanistan, when the USSR invaded Afghanistan between 1979 to 1989, quite a long time. And that is where the whole, current day issue concerns. So whether you want to refer to the current government as the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, or you want to refer to it as the Afghan government, which was democratically labeled by the US government, or you want to call it the Taliban, that's up to you. But you've got to really understand the historical context in order for you to fully appreciate what is going on. We've got to remember that the United States and the CIA, and also the Pakistani ISI, they together formed, the Mujahideens, who then became what, we call the Taliban, so, I mean, we often refer to as Taliban, but again, that's a Pashto word for students. Some say it's an Arabic word for, for seekers of knowledge, but then it makes a lot of sense to really understand what this means. So let us settle for students, and then, we can take it from there. So, the defeat of Russia or the Soviet Union by the Mujahideen led to the formation of the Taliban government. Of course, the US had armed the Taliban, with Stinger, missiles, and, the Taliban became so powerful that it then took over the government of Afghanistan. And it's very important for us to note that the same period as in 1996, when the Taliban came to power, 2 years later, we had explosions in Kenya. That's the US embassy in Kenya, and one in Tanzania. And this was blamed on Osama bin Laden. And Osama bin Laden, as we all know, was the mastermind of the Mujahideens that were sponsored by the CIA and ISI. At that time, Osama bin Laden found himself in one African country, which we all know as Sudan. And it is from Sudan that these attacks, that took place against the US government in Kenya and Tanzania, that's where they took place in 1998. So Africa has always been on the map when it comes to Afghanistan. Now, 1999, is the period when Osama bin Laden was handed over back to Afghanistan. And this was under the knowledge of the United States. They knew, they were informed by the Sudanese government that Osama bin Laden was leaving from Sudan. He was being flown back to Afghanistan. And at the time, the US said, we don't really have anything to do with him. We don't need him. And of course, bin Laden went back to Afghanistan, and he was now developing his Al-Qaeda group, which eventually launched the devastating 9/11 attacks. Now, let us be very clear, again, down to historical perspective, that the Taliban was a government, between 1996, and 2001, when it was overthrown by the US state. It was a full-fledged government. It was a government that had its own military, it had its own police. Now, the cultural implications of how the Taliban, were running their state, that is a matter of constitutional affair. I mean, that is also a matter for Afghanese, sorry. But the Taliban was a full government. And we have to also remember that the reason why the United States, went to Afghanistan in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks was, to ensure that they punish the Taliban government for shielding Al-Qaeda. That was one reason. The second reason was to get rid of Al-Qaeda and to eliminate Osama bin Laden. Of course, that was one mission. So it wasn't just to get rid of Al-Qaeda, it was also to get rid of Osama bin Laden. So fast forward, the US succeeded in getting rid of Osama bin Laden, which was one success. They did not succeed to get rid of Al-Qaeda, but then they succeeded in destroying the centralized system that Al-Qaeda had under Osama bin Laden. So Al-Qaeda became a lot more divided into various cells and various units. And the audience, we've got to remember that at the same time in 2001, there was a movement that came up in one African country, which is the most populous country in the world, in Africa, the most populous Black country in the world, which is Nigeria. There was a movement in 2001 that called itself the Nigerian Taliban. That movement eventually became Boko Haram that we have today. And then, of course, it split to the Islamic State of West Africa province. Now, the reason why I mention this is because I want you to understand the links between before Taliban came to power, very powerfully, during the Nairobi and the bombings in Tanzania, but also the links that it had afterwards, when the US overthrew the government, which then brings us to Nigeria. So you already have that significant link there between the Taliban and Nigeria, which is the most populous country in Africa. And then, of course, you had the issue with Sudan being sanctioned by the United States for being a sponsor of terrorism. And this was also because of the role that was given to Osama bin Laden at the time when he was in Sudan. He opened a couple of institutions there, including some academic institutions. So there we are with those links between the Taliban and African states. But again, let's talk about the fact that the Bush administration then decided that they were going to not just reduce the capacity of the Al-Qaeda, which was responsible for 9/11, but then they decided in a third option, which was not in the plan. The third option was to change the regime from an Islamic emirate to a democratic government of Afghanistan. And this was the beginning of the US failure because, of course, the US tried to replicate a government in its own image without taking into consideration the cultural and religious implications. Remember, it was the US who made sure that during the Mujahideen periods, they brought a lot of very powerful ideological books, which they distributed to the Mujahideens, including the books of Said Qutb, which was used as a strategy and continuously being used as a strategic book for Al-Qaeda. They also made sure that they gave the so-called Mujahideens much more training and weapons. So if we're talking about the Taliban and also the current situation, the US cannot take itself out of that equation. So we've got to make that also very, very clear. So again, the Taliban were removed from power, and then the US decided that it was time to spread its wings towards Iraq. And this is where the problems began, because we didn't just have today the Al-Qaeda group that the US decided to get rid of, rightly so, but now we have the Islamic State, which came as a result of Al-Qaeda. I call it, the son of Al-Qaeda, or Al-Qaeda is the father of the Islamic State, because in 2001 there was no ISIS, but after 2001 you now have ISIS. So I mean that point goes on to show how much terrorism has spread and not reduced after 2001. Another point which I think is very critical to make is the fact that after 20 years now, the Taliban has been replaced by the US with the Taliban. The governance system that the US brought in Afghanistan failed, because as Abdul Rahim said, corruption was one of the issues, but also strategically because the US decided to replace a government that was traditional, a government that was very religious and cultural, with a democratic government. I mean, there were very strong reasons that were advocated. They talked about the way that the Taliban operated, how it treated women, how it treated, looked at Western style of education, the brutality of its regime, and also the fact that it supported terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. So those are very key implications. I think I wrote what I call the 5 points for the Taliban to consider in order for it to be recognized. And I listed those points, and I said very clearly that the first thing that the Taliban needs to do is to ensure that it does not have terrorist groups that operate within Afghanistan that will have a direct impact on the Western world, on the people of Afghanistan, because if it does, then it is opening another route for the US to come back again. And that is something which the Taliban, possibly does not want to repeat. I think the second point, which I've made very clearly, is that the Taliban is got to have an inclusive government. Even right in 1996, when the Taliban took over from the government at the time, they were only able to manage 90% of the country, and that means they had 10% of the country which wasn't under the Taliban control. But if you look at 20 years later on, 25 or 30 years later on, the Taliban now has almost 100% of the country. Now, we shouldn't forget that there is what you call the Panchji Revolution, which is called the National Resistance Front. At the time, it was run by one man called Ahmad Massoud, who was killed in 2001. And his son has taken over that revolution. So as we speak, there is a revolution from the Panchji Valley, which is fighting against the current government of the Islamic State of Emirate of Afghanistan. That's very, very clear. So I just wanted to make all this clear in terms of the historical bit, but also to say that Afghanistan is surrounded by very, precarious and very powerful nations. You've got China, which has an issue with the Uyghur minorities. So China is taking a very strategic position. Russia is also one of the countries which is very much interested in the stability of Afghanistan. I remember in 2001, I know my time is running out, but give me a couple of minutes. I remember in 2001 when the United States and Great Britain wanted to embark on the 9/11 invasion. The British government dispatched a number of MI6, intelligence officers to Moscow. And they went to Moscow to find out from the Russians, which was quite unlikely scenario. They went to find out from Russia what was their experience, when they were faced by the Taliban, during the Soviet Union period. And, they sat in a meeting, and once they explained what they wanted to do, the Russians, began to laugh. And after they finished laughing, they said to the Great Britain, if you go to Afghanistan, you will fight, you will lose your men, and then you'll be disgraced. You will leave the country, and then we would have an advantage over you. And this was a candid explanation that was given to Great Britain at the time, about 21 years ago. And we've seen that happen. We've seen that there are issues now within regional states like Pakistan. Pakistan now has what you call the Pakistani Taliban, which is also mainly from the Pashto tribe. A lot of them are now involved in the leadership of the Taliban. Iran is also a very strategic country that is within the borders of Afghanistan, but also all the other stands, the Tajikistan, the Turkmenistan, they are all there. So I think when we're looking at the implications, be it from a regional perspective, as I've mentioned, or from an African perspective, where you have, different, terrorist organizations saying that they recognize and they're happy with what the Taliban has done, I think it's very, very crucial for us to understand that Boko Haram cannot compare itself with the Taliban, because the Taliban was a government before. It wasn't a terrorist organization. It is now a terrorist organization by those who decide to label it as such, but the Taliban has never seen itself as a terrorist organization. Some countries do not, don't label Taliban used to fight against the US and the NATO coalition. You could say that these were acts of terrorism. But labeling the Taliban as a terrorist organization is something which some countries have accepted to do so, and some other countries have not accepted to do so. So I think it's very important for us to get that point very clear. Now, if you look at the new Taliban government and you see all the leaders that have been put in place, you would realize that we are still back to the Mullah Mohammed Hassan Akund, who is now acting as the head of state. Mullah Barada Akund, who was the second in command to Mullah Omar, and also the son of Mullah Omar, who is very much involved in the government. Beheading. This is something entirely in the constitution and the way and the system of government that the Taliban have decided to operate. We cannot rate the behavior of the Taliban's government in terms of how they treat their citizens as opposed to a democratic system, because they are not a democratic government. We've got to get that very, very clear. Also, I think the last point, which I think I should make, is that in terms of the cost benefit analysis, I think that the invasion, the bombing and the occupation of Afghanistan overall was a waste because you had more people killed than the people that were killed during the 9/11 strike, which means, it was an overwhelming, disproportionate action. We have, a displacement of terrorism from Afghanistan throughout the world. You mentioned Nigeria, Somalia with Al-Shabaab. In Mozambique, we've got the ISIS-affiliated movement. In Mali, you've got the Islamic State of the Greater Sahel and Al-Qaeda. So in Libya, we have the same. So in terms of the cost-benefit analysis, I still believe that it was a disproportionate movement, and we've got more insecurity today than we had before. And hopefully, we can see how much details we can get from this. I so much rely on some of your questions that you pose, so that I can dig deep into some of these areas which, due to time, I'm constrained to go through. Thank you very much. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. David. Thank you for that analysis. Thank you for mentioning issues concerning the geopolitical concerns. And thank you so much for interlinking or connecting these issues and all that terrorist organization across the world, and especially in Africa. So just to proceed to the next level, I have some specific question. And this question I will ask you direct, David. Then the next panelist can also respond to this question. So one of the participants was asking, is it safe to assume that the new Taliban government will not directly support with money, weapons, and bases in terrorist groups that operate currently in Middle East, Central Asia, South Asia, Russia, or China? Is the world at least a little bit safer in that regard now with the Taliban 2.0? So I repeat again, the question is it safe to assume that the new Taliban government will not directly support with money, weapon, and bases any terrorist groups that operate currently in Middle East, Central Asia, South Asia, Russia, or China? Is the world at least a little bit safer in this regard?
Okay, let me take that. Let me take that question, and I'll be very direct. In principle, I think you quite remember that there was what you call the Doha Agreement. The Doha Agreement in 2020 allowed the Taliban to come back to power and share power with the government of Afghanistan. This was signed between representatives of the Taliban and the US government. The government of Afghanistan played a role, but not very much, they were not as much involved in the role as they could have been involved or they should have been involved. So one of the terms of that agreement was that the US will withdraw its forces entirely from Afghanistan. And in exchange for that, the Taliban would ensure that Al-Qaeda does not operate, or Al-Qaeda does not have the capacity to carry out any attack against US and its coalition interest. So that agreement was signed, and the Taliban signed and said, we would ensure that it doesn't happen. Now, the question is, does the Taliban have the capacity to ensure that groups like the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, or the ISIK in Khorasan province, which is based in Afghanistan, do they have the capacity to ensure that they cannot carry out attacks? I mean, the question is no, they don't have that capacity. I mean, even when the US was doing the evacuation, you saw the bombing that happened, which was claimed by the ISIS. Just about a week ago, there was a bombing in the mosque. I think so. I think something like that, which killed a lot of people, and also the Islamic State claimed that attack. So even though the Taliban might want to, put his hands up and say we will ensure that Al Qaeda or ISIS do not carry out attacks, that is just a promise, and that promise has to be met with the capacity to be able to do that. Now, if the US is not supporting, is not recognizing, is not assisting, and other countries are not assisting the Taliban in ensuring that it has good governance, in ensuring that it has stability, then there is no way that the Taliban will be able to honor its promise. So that is very clear. Now, the second point is, whether the world is a lot more safer. Now, from an Afghanist perspective, one would say that, the Taliban is no longer a threat as it used to be when it was not a government. When you're a government, you don't act the same. So if Afghanistan used to have the Taliban, they used to have Haqqani network, they used to have the Islamic State of the Khorasan province as a threat, then the Taliban is now out of the way. The Taliban is no longer a threat. So Haqqani network is also no longer a threat because, of course, most of the Haqqani brothers, people like Surajuddin Haqqani, he's, the Minister for Interior in charge of the security. Khalil Rahman Haqqani, he's the Minister for Refugees. You also have Anas Haqqani, who is also one of the ministers. The Najibullah Haqqani is the Education Minister. So the Haqqani network, which used to be a terrorist organization, is now embedded within the Taliban. When I say it used to be a terrorist organization, I mean some countries and some institutions labeled it a terrorist organization, not all. So the Haqqani network is so much involved in the current Afghan government. So I don't know if that means there is a reduction of threat, nationally as it opposed to the Haqqani network. Now that's just in Afghanistan, but internationally, I don't think the Taliban will be supporting any, country or Nigeria, Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab in Somalia. I don't think so. But this is me not thinking so. I don't know what the leaders of the Taliban think. But from what they say, they're saying that they will not engage in supporting, they will not engage in giving refuge, they will not engage in giving any financial incentives to any terrorist organization in the world. Now, this is what the Taliban says. I don't know what the Taliban will do, but my proposition has always been, if you want to keep the Taliban as a government, you've got to support them, because in desperation, they will be dangerous than when they're a stable government. So my proposition is bring stability to Afghanistan, and you bring stability to the region and the rest of the world. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. David, for sharing these insightful quotes and insightful information. So my next question I will direct it to Abdul. Abdul, do you think that the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan will pose more of threats in terms of terrorism? Do you think that the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan will pose more of threats in terms of terrorism? Back to you, Abdul.
Thank you very much. Before I answer that question, I would like to thank Sir David, my colleague in this call. Very wonderful, in-depth overview of the Taliban and the terrorism. But I would like to add a couple of points there from his talk. First about Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden was not killed in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden was killed by US airstrike in one of the states of Pakistan. So Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan. So I think the US troops have been should have been gone to Pakistan after Al Qaeda, not to Afghanistan. Yes, if they were in Afghanistan, but the reality is, as David mentioned, Mujahideen and Taliban and all, they formed it by different names and different groups. All of them were trained and equipped in Pakistan. So all the supply was from Pakistan. And even today, Pakistan is one of the highest threats to Afghanistan and to the rest of the world. It's being discussed internationally when it comes to terrorism. And the second point that he was mentioning about the Taliban will not have a connection with other. The Taliban was not a terrorist. He said they were a government, but Boko Haram. He did a comparison to other terrorist group. I think we cannot compare terrorist to terrorist, and terrorist is terrorist. Imagine if somebody do a crime, you cannot say this person was not a criminal, but now he's a criminal. When now he's a criminal, then that's it. He's a criminal. The Taliban, if the question is, if you look at it technically, if they were a government, if they were not terrorists, why they could not continue, even if they failed due to anything you call it, if there's any technical issue, they failed, or like a normal government, they failed, or they finished their government, whatever you call it. If you look at it technically, not historically, you will see they were not capable. If they were capable, if they were really government, even from the beginning, they were not government. They were like came with all of these horrible actions, horrible activities. Why today people have bad memories from Taliban? Because from the last time that they were imitating as a government, they were not even able at that time. Women were not allowed to work. Women were not respected. Women were putting down. Children, a lot of crimes. And throughout the course of the 20 years, if they were really government and really Afghan, and they really wanted to be as a government, and if they were really capable technically to govern a country, why they didn't come with their strategy to do election, to compete with others, and to come through the election and let the people select them? Today, this all the fake statements that they are giving about they're not gonna communicate with other terrorist group, that's completely false, because they came together to this stage with the help of other terrorist groups. Today, if you see, if you look at Al Qaeda, who is Al Qaeda? They're their brothers, they're their friends, they're their allies, and this is something completely clear. It's believing to Taliban words this is something when I'm telling you. It's from the experience, from what Afghans are experiencing. As I told you, if they were any capable, Afghanistan people are not full. They know if these people are really capable of doing something, they will support them. They would welcome them. They will see an opportunity for them to come forward, participate in election, and do the government. I mean, take the government peacefully and do it. And even now, today, we are saying, what's wrong? Just a small example. What is wrong in women going to university or school? This shows their low mentality. It shows like they're the same people, even if they allow after this. Even the recent news, even in the Doha discussion, they said that we confirm and we make sure that Afghanistan will be not used against other countries, and we will not support other terrorist groups. But but women working and going to school and all university, it will be a question still. We need time to solve it, and that is completely falsifying all of these promises. Whatever you see in the media, believing in that will be a complete lack of knowledge or technical expertise, whatever. Because all they're trying to do, at least from the media perspective, you people are right. They're just saying, "Oh, Taliban is saying this and that." You can just say that, but the fact is, they're just acting that the world should unfreeze, defreeze Afghanistan assets, and once they have had their hands on money, once they have been given legitimacy, and once they have all the tools and access to all of the things that they want, then you're gonna keep on reacting, and they want to keep on doing the same thing. They're gonna keep on, even now, even daily basis, every day. As of now, we are talking. They are beating people. They are looking after the former military members. They're looking after former employees, like high government employees. they're looking after all the Afghan brains, all the Afghan talent, or anybody who can put a benefit to Afghanistan. Definitely they are against it. I'm not saying the previous governments were great, of course not. The ex-politicians, whoever in 20 years, by the way, who were in Afghan government, all of them were corrupt. All of them were dishonest. And today we have seen all of them have been skipped from the country. They didn't have not the policy, not the strategy, not the bravery, not the leadership, and nothing. They could not do anything. They just skipped. So the point is here. No, answering to the first question, I would like to quickly answer that one. No, it's not any safe. Taliban will definitely, they will need, as of now, even like countries like Canada, they clearly indicated that they will not consider Taliban as a legitimate government. Of course, any normal power or government or human being will not. And these people, as David said, they don't have the capability, they don't have the technical ability to run the government. Of course not, because first of all, they themselves don't have, and most of the experts are not working with them. Even recently, a lot of experts have resigned from their positions from the different governmental entities because they are not okay to work with this. Imagine if you want to go work in a company or an organization, which kind of working environment you would be expecting to have to work there. And if you are not safe, if you are not feeling the environment, the way that where you can communicate, you can have your voice, you can promote, you can improve, you will not be able to work there, and you don't want to work there. So they don't have this capability, they don't have this capacity. That's why it's very strange that the people, like some people that they just believe that they are a government, they have military presence. Well, I understand also the world has no other choice to just, in terms of talking to them, that might be okay to talk in terms of giving the humanitarian aid, delivering humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, which is Afghanistan is spending one of the most critical times in this, and that might be right to talk and make sure that the situation will be available in a way that they can deliver this humanitarian aid to the people, to the needy people. But unfortunately, how are they going to do this? I mean, Taliban in front of the media and camera, probably they give like to one or two people, but they're not going to give to actual people. They're going to take themselves. They're going to strengthen themselves. They're going to give to their allies, to their friends. We have seen how many military equipment, from Afghanistan went to Pakistan. Why? If they were not connected to Pakistan, if they want a government, a terrorist-less government, if they really don't want to support other terrorism and all, why they are sending already American equipments, American artilleries to Pakistan? Why? Because there are other terrorist groups in Pakistan, and they are trying to equip them with American artilleries. And they will definitely, if Taliban actually don't need to reach other terrorist groups in Africa or anywhere else, they will contact Taliban. They will, the same way the government, let's say if you want to go have a study case, a study case of a country, how they succeeded in a specific area, for example, in environment or in energy sector or oil sector or any sector, they want to see how they succeeded. The same way the other terrorist group, they want to come to Taliban, hey man, how you succeeded, let's do it together and all, and they will definitely do it. Taliban is waiting for anybody who can cooperate with them. Let it be any government or anybody. They just want to strengthen. Definitely, they are not there for a long-term government. They didn't come to help Afghanistan or Afghans. They didn't come to make a government and make everybody happy. They came, actually, that's a part of terrorists. In collaboration with other terrorist groups, they came here, they took Afghanistan. They're all celebrating together in this, and they're going to continue working together. That's for sure, and there is no doubt in that. And there is no safety. It's not about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is suffering. There is no safety in Afghanistan. Nothing. We are talking beyond Afghanistan. We are talking beyond the region. Africa is the first vulnerable region to suffer this. I mean, if you look at the primary version of terrorism, what is that? Crime. How normally, if you see crimes happen, lack of jobs, poverty, and so many other things. Now, I have traveled to Africa. I have seen many countries in Africa. There are a lot of poor people in Africa. Let's say if somebody comes and give them some money, give them some motivation, brainwash them, it's very likely that they can join, they can do anything, they can go travel to Europe, they can go travel anywhere else, they can do anything wrong. And we have seen, now we're speaking of Taliban, in the media it just looked like Taliban, but actually they have Arabs among them. They have Africans, they have so many other. So I think, no, the answer is no, absolutely, it's not safe. And I think words should be very, very careful in that.
Thank you so much, Abdul. So just heading to my next question. This question is to Mr. David. Mr. David, now let's look at 20 years later. So in your opinion, is there any chance that the new Afghanistan government will cooperate with other countries in anti-terrorism efforts? Is there anything to motivate them to do so? Let me repeat again.
Yes, I got the question.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, I think I do recognize what my co-panelist Abdul Rahim is saying. I also think that we've got to be able to separate a government from its policies. You know, when you have a government and it has very brutal policies, it still remains a government, irrespective of how you see its policies. And that is in reference to the Taliban government, you know, before, you know, 2001. Now, the point which, you know, Abdul makes very well is the fact that the Taliban should have perhaps come to power using elections. And I just think it's a bit difficult to understand why a government that was removed from power without elections would want to come to power using elections. The US could have said to the people of Afghanistan, you know, you can vote them out, and then we wouldn't have the Taliban. But the US didn't do that. The US decided to use the barrel of the gun to take out the Taliban government. So it wasn't surprising to see that the Taliban used the same barrel of the gun to come back to power. So I think that's a bit of a balance of approach there. Now, in terms of your question about whether there are any chances that the Afghan government will cooperate with other countries, let me be very clear in terms of what is going on. You know, immediately the Ashraf Ghani president, the former president of Afghanistan, when he left power, you know, during the 9 days invasion, and the Taliban took over the state house, you know, to call it that, the first world leader to visit Afghanistan and pay a visit, you know, to the Taliban government, you know, if I want to call it that, was the CIA director. And he met with the Taliban in Kabul. I don't know what discussions they had. And then, you know, where you had the Pakistani ISS, director. He was also in Kabul, and there was a protest. As Abdul Rahim would recognize, that there was a protest there to say, you know, Pakistan is very close to the Taliban, therefore it was behind the chaos that is happening in Afghanistan. And then you had the UK security agency also paying a visit, you know, to the Taliban government in Doha, not in Kabul. And then China recognized them and said, you know, we would work with any government that is in power. Russia has done the same. Qatar has done the same. Turkey has done the same. Now, there is this diplomatic language that countries often use and say, we will not recognize the Taliban, but we would engage with them. I mean, that is just nonsense. The truth is that you cannot engage with a government that you don't recognize. It doesn't make any sense in English. In order for you to engage with somebody, you've got to recognize them. You know, if you look at international relations, you know, there is no country that says, I recognize this country. It doesn't work like that. You know, they would engage with them. It's a sign of recognition. So I think, you know, countries are already working with the Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan. They're already working with them. They are working in the background, but some countries are quite naive and they have stayed behind, you know, instead of them to engage and protect, you know, their own interest. You know, they are waiting for a day when the US would announce that we recognize them, and then they also say we recognize them. I mean, in practice, it doesn't work like that. I think for the interest of global security, for the interest of global stability, you know, what we should be emphasizing on when it comes to the Taliban government is for them to be able to reform and that is why I wrote what I call the 5-point reforms. And I talked about the fact that the Taliban has to be able to demonstrate, that, it can fight against terrorism. And the only motivation that they need is for them to be engaged with. The United Nations has already engaged with the Taliban government. They are already providing humanitarian aid. So the more countries engage with the Taliban, the more countries they recognize that they're in power. If you want to take them out, organize elections too. I mean, if the people of Afghanistan believe that the Taliban is not the right government, let them organize an election, or let them wait for an election, and then take them out of power. That is what I advocate. I don't advocate a government that comes to power by force. I don't support it either. I don't, so for me, what I think should be done, and what we should be encouraging at this point in time, is that we assist the current Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan to ensure that there is national stability, that people are not suffering, people are not leaving the country to escape to other countries. We engage them to ensure that there is regional stability, and to make it very clear to all these Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab and the rest of the terrorist groups in the world who think they can benefit from what the Taliban has done, so that they can make it very clear to them that, listen, don't compare yourself with us. We were a government, you're just a terrorist. Over to you.
Thank you, sir, for that analysis. Thank you for giving us those juicy content with a lot of insights. We highly appreciate. So my next question will be directed to Abdul. Abdul, is it now more likely or less likely that the new terrorist group will rise in Afghanistan and Pakistan, taking the place of the Taliban? Because I can remember you mentioned something concerning Pakistan. So is it now more likely or less likely for the new terrorist groups to rise in Afghanistan or Pakistan? Abdul, back to you.
Thank you very much. Absolutely, that's the case, not only in Pakistan, but in Afghanistan, and then it will go to Pakistan this time. This time, already, like as now we're speaking, there are so many terrorists, different terrorist groups. Like I'm sure like the people who sees it from a media, it's a completely different perspective. If you're having connections in Afghanistan, if there are people, like if you follow more deeper and local, you will see that there are terrorist groups. There are languages that people talking among them that people don't know, like which language is this. They really don't know. Even the Taliban themselves will facing a problem with that, and it's going to be very complex. Now Afghanistan went out of the hands. Russia came, and then the US came, and before British came, and now China is there. So everyone is trying now. What do you think? Like, if US is, let's say, if we talk like if US is supporting like the Taliban came and all, or however, like David was saying, like how if these people have been kicked out by gun and they came in by gun, and then it has a long story, like why these people were there, and then why they have gone from there, why US kicked them out. There were problems. And even in connection to that, today, people are seeing that image exactly, that they are saying, like, we're going to talk to these people just to deliver the humanitarian aid and not anything else. And yes, I do agree, it doesn't make sense to talk to them, and then you will say you're not going to recognize them. We didn't recognize them, but you're going to talk to them. That is correct. But the thing is, if you look at the scenario, it is something completely different. This is not some kind of experience happening somewhere else in the world that you would say, oh, you know what, normally governments don't recognize, and then they talk. If they talk, definitely there is diplomatic relations between the governments. There are so many other things. There are governments, yes, like China and others working with them in the background. Definitely that geopolitical issue is there, and everyone is trying to do their job for sure. And Taliban is benefiting this situation actually, and Taliban is there because of this. It's not like they are a government. It's not like they are capable of doing anything. It's not like they are Afghans or they can help or grow Afghans, or it's not like they came to make Afghanistan a better place. Then the presence of US, while there was relatively, in terms of technicalities, better governments, in terms of women were working, there were developments, the projects were there in different sectors, the economy was getting better, so many business people, so many international relations, so many things were going on. If in that time Afghanistan was not safe, now how you technically see viable that some people, even imagine these people are not terrorists, some people with no technical experience, with no governing experience, nothing, they come and do something better. That definitely after, especially after these people, 20 years a long time to these people being trained, brainwashed to do wrong, not right. And absolutely these people are in that situation. They have been trained, brainwashed. Do you know that even today in the news were there, they have the people, the soldiers were ready to make suicide attacks, to put the bombs and explode, make explosion near to the borders of Tajikistan and all, in order to protect themselves. Now imagine which government gonna use this tactic as a military setup to do something like that, to defend yourself. So this is already an act of terrorism. This is already encouraging terrorists to be ready for suicide bombing attacks, and you will have a demand. So this is something completely, that's why I give the word the right to say, because this is a very exceptional situation, I give them the right to say they have to talk to them. Today they are saying you talk to them to just to deliver the humanitarian aid and help their nations to get out of the country. Only because of these main two purposes they're going to talk to them. Otherwise, they are not talking about, definitely all the countries will not recognize them. Even if they recognize them, believe me, you will see a huge disaster in the world. That is the concern. Today, I think what we have to focus is how they came and who they are and all this. We have to see what they have done and what they can do. And imagine today, technically, the solution is not to train these people to become like a government, or not to assist them, not to do anything, because they are not capable. Even if you assist them, you can do anything, they will not be able to. How come you bring somebody who is not doctor, you'll tell them, you know what, I'm going to give this guy a training for a month to make an operation. It's completely, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't work this way. The only way is, like I suggested, the virtual Afghan passport. I will write that website in the chat box, you can go and check it. I suggested virtual passports for Afghans because today they have problems with their passports and the legitimacy of their passport and all. It's something we have to change the game. It doesn't work this way to, again, you know, like old style, we have to work with this government. It's like, it's not even a government. They're not even an establishment. They're nothing. They are there just to ruin the world, and that's a terrorism point. Afghanistan will be a official terrorism point if they've been recognized as a government. The only solution is, there are a lot of capable Afghans, there are a lot of expert Afghans. We have to take control of most of the government elements out of the country. For example, the virtual passport will give Afghans to take their passport online. They can work with fintech companies. They can travel freely. This should be run by an independent Afghan organization registered in New York or somewhere, which is allies of Afghanistan, and being led and run by Afghans, giving passport to Afghans, which will help that we can screen through a very careful vetting process who is a really Afghan and who is terrorist, because unfortunately now in Afghanistan there are a lot of terrorists. You don't know really who is who. How are you going to deal, first of all, with a country you don't know who is who in the country, and somebody traveling from Afghanistan somewhere, they're going to blow something somewhere, they're going to do some bad stuff, they're going to do a lot of crazy things. Women are not feeling safe there, educated people are not feeling safe there. So I suggested this to Afghans, at least have this privacy of their travel, their identity. Like, Afghans should not be treated everywhere as a terrorist. Afghans are not terrorists, but there are terrorists, unfortunately, in Afghanistan. So this is one of the options. It can be a start of a big revolution that we have. Afghans should take in control the main elements of a government outside the country. Anyways, everything of Afghanistan is today out of country. Our assets is out of Afghanistan. our good people are out of Afghanistan and all. So why not to take the passport, the bank, the funds, IMF, for example, give the funds to a financial institution should be formed in UAE or in US or in Europe somewhere. Like the money should be utilized well, should be given to the right Afghans, not to be poured to the terrorists. Even now, to humanitarian aids are going to the hands of terrorists. And Afghans are suffering, as David said. Today we see more terrorist situation than 20 years back. Today you see more hunger and more problem than 20 years back. So Afghans will continue to suffer if in that 20 years of all of these billions of dollars, nothing fixed. Now you think, now if we're gonna help some millions, they're gonna give humanitarian aid, it will not reach the poor Afghans really. It will go in hand of terrorists, and it's actually very dangerous. But there should be a way for sure the humanitarian aid should be delivered to Afghanistan, but with a strategy. Apart from that, like when it comes to the government elements like passport, like financial asset of Afghanistan, or so many other things, so that these people feel weak and go from where they came from, so that Afghans can form. There is not a shortage of men in Afghanistan. There are not shortage of politicians in Afghanistan or experienced people in Afghanistan. Afghans can form a good government from among the people. Let these people come from where they came, go from where they came from, and Afghans will find a way. There is still 35 to 36 million of people in Afghanistan, and they can take care of themselves.
Thank you so much, Abdul. Thank you so much to share concerning the digital passport. We highly appreciate, and we will appreciate also if you can share it in the chat box so that all the participants can view about it, can learn about it. I can see we remain with only 14 minutes. And at this moment, I will open this session to all participants. In case you have any question, you just raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask the question to the panelists direct. So in case of any participants who want to ask the question, unmute yourself and talk direct. I can see Orao wants to talk something. Orao, are you connected? Orao? Orao, are you connected? We cannot hear you.
My background is quite noisy. I had placed my question on the chat to see it and read it.
Okay, let me view the question directly and ask it to the participant, to the panelists. So Orao was asking that she's interested in knowing and understanding the role of young women in preventing and halting the current terrorism attacks. She's interested in knowing and understanding the role of young women in preventing and halting the current terrorism attack. This question back to Mr. David and Abdul. What's your opinion to this question? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. The thing is, terrorism has no gender. And therefore, when you're countering terrorism, you therefore have to reverse engineer in the sense that you have to involve all the genders, men, women, young people, the elderly, the government, non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, regional, international parties. But specifically, I think in the case of Afghanistan, especially now that the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan has been established, they've made it very clear that women will play a role in the government in accordance with Sharia, and that is a very, very clear position. How much they, they engage women, because I've seen scenarios and I speak to people back in Afghanistan. One thing which you see is that you have one set of women who are protesting for a certain right, and then you have another set of women in another area that are protesting against it. We've seen that happening, but again, maybe when it comes to the groundwork, the role that women, should play or could play or are playing in Afghanistan, I think I would refer that to Abdul Rahim. He may have a better understanding as to, from where he's sitting, what he thinks women are doing. My views are quite distant, and his might be a lot more closer to the terrain. Over to you, my brother Abdul.
Thank you very much, David. I think, yes, as you said, terrorists has no gender. When it comes to, if you look to statistics, I think involvement of women have been toward the positivity more than negativity. We see less terrorist women, for example. I think if we encourage women today, one of the biggest problems Afghans are facing, like a lot of women, even the Ministry of Women has changed to some kind of ministry which is not even needed in Afghan society for the country. Such a thing is perhaps not vital. If you go to other Islamic countries, we see Dubai, we see UAE, we see Qatar, we see Indonesia, Malaysia. They have Ministry of Technology, Ministry of Innovation, Ministry of Young leaders and all. They're all Islamic countries, and it's not Islam. Which Sharia law they are talking about? That's not what Sharia law is talking about. What Islam is clear. Everything is clear. Other Islamic countries are practicing it well, and Afghan can do the same. Women are very important for progress of a country. Women are part of the nation. Without women, improvement will not be there. Even they are going in conflict against themselves. Imagine if they don't let their women out, at the same time they don't let women to work. So how your woman then will visit a hospital having a female doctor or a female soldier? That's again another example of somebody who is not into the government, who is not into something good for a government. Absolutely, today anybody normal, if you want to run an organization, a country is a very big level, without involvement of different gender, different tribes, even disabled people should be involved. They are not recognizing one of the most important elements of society, which are women, of course.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abdul. Thank you so much, Mr. David. So as we about to wrap up the whole session, I would like to give us your cut shots and your recommendation. So what are your recommendations for the foreign policies and the counterterrorism effort sectors? What recommendation do you have? And would you suggest in the foreign policy and counterterrorism efforts? Back to you, Abdul and David.
Thank you very much. In case of Afghanistan, like if we talk in general, what will be the recommendation? Let's say other countries should avoid terrorism. I think the first, before talking foreign policy, I think it's very important for the countries to focus on improvement and job creation, improvement in economy and all. That's one of the things which help reduce the threats to the country, let it be crimes or terrorism activities and all. And in case of Afghanistan, I think Afghans should take action, aware Afghans, educated Afghans, change the game. We have to take things in our control. Afghans should serve for Afghans. We cannot let anywhere, let's say Africans should serve for Africans. It's impossible. Imagine tomorrow some terrorist group comes to one of the African country and take it, and the rest of the world sit and recognize them and let Africans suffer. Today, Afghans are suffering, and this is a good example for the foreign policies. Should be very careful, take a very good lesson from this 20 years, that what are the failures, it's very clear, and what has been done and what to be done to protect. Actually, there are a lot of things to recommend and talk about this subject. I wish we had more time. But I think Afghanistan is a good lesson, and it's an exceptional experience, actually, because something like this doesn't happen in anywhere else, that the terrorist groups so far, this come and take the government. I'm afraid this is going to be the first, and some countries will follow to do so if we are not careful.
Yes, Yes, thank you for that, Abdul. I think my recommendations are quite simple. The first thing is that, in the short and immediate term, where we are at the moment, my encouragement would be for humanity and global security to come first. And that means for governments to, recognize and engage with the current government of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, not engage before recognizing, because that doesn't work in practice. And we have seen such a recognition, such an engagement, which is ongoing. As I speak to you, the Taliban government is meeting with the Turkish government. They actually met with the EU and the UN. They're having talks with the International Monetary Fund, to release some of the funding that will help humanity, that will help Afghanis, to come out of the very precarious situation that they are in. So let the world recognize the government, and let us work with them to ensure that there is national stability in Afghanistan, to ensure that we can put pressure, or the world can put pressure on the Taliban government to ensure that it refrains from revenge tactics. It allows some level of flexibility within its Sharia system, but also that we should discourage, a brain drain. A lot of the best Afghanis live in Afghanistan, and this is not a good image. It will hurt the country in future. This is not a good sight that they're escaping, but it has to work both ways. The US has to work closely with the Taliban government, and also the Taliban government has to work closely with the US government and its NATO partners, making sure that they can keep their bargain of their agreement. Now, in terms of the, my own recommendation for the US government's counterterrorism strategy around the world, is that culture its strategy for breakfast. When you set up your strategy that you're going to overthrow a country, you're going to invade it, bomb it, and occupy it, you must be able to understand the cultural and religious implications, and so that we will not see another 20 years of waste. A counterinsurgency operation should not be used for some kind of a geopolitical strategy, and we shouldn't promote regime change. If you promote regime change by invading countries, you are not different from people who in Africa that are organizing coup d'etats. It is the same thing. So my recommendation is that counterinsurgency operations have to be well designed. They have to be well planned to ensure that we don't repeat what happened in Afghanistan. For African countries, they've got to look at their own national security strategies and understand that the affluence of terrorism in these countries is as a result of the lack of a strategy. We must work on economic empowerment. We develop what I call the triangle of terror, which is fight against ideological science, by providing counter narratives and alternative narratives. You fight against the capacity of groups to recruit, to get weapons, by ensuring that you can protect your national borders, you can protect your boundaries, you can ensure that you have some form of national stability, and then also that we've got to ensure, as a whole, that we protect people, we protect properties, we protect the image of our countries in Africa, so that we can have some peace and stability. We're working towards that, ensuring that countries like Libya can become safe again. It is taking time, but hopefully that is going to yield some results. Now, last but not the least, just a message to all the terrorist organizations that in Africa, in the world, thinking that they can replicate what the Taliban has done. My message is that you are not the Taliban. You were not a government before. You don't have the capacity to do that. In Nigeria, you can't do it. In Somalia, you cannot. In Mozambique, you cannot. In Mali, you cannot. So don't try to copy the Taliban. This was a full-fledged government. I think the best thing is to engage in some form of, at best, some form of negotiation, so that governments can recognize some of the push and pull factors, that led these groups into becoming what they are. That is my recommendation. But I think the world would be a better place if there is global collaboration and coordination. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. So as we finalize this session, it's now 6:30 exactly East Africa time. And we'd like to advertise for our next session, which will be on 28th of October. In October, we'll have a special session focused on the situation of women and men in Afghanistan. In this session, we will have a special guest who was a former MP of Afghanistan. So follow us in social media to get more updates concerning the next session. This session will be purely concerning the situation of women and girls plus men, as majority of the participants have been requested. And the confirmed speaker will be the former MP of Afghanistan. We'll share more details via the email. Thank you so much for joining, and see you in the next few weeks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
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 Thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye.